Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty, and today I'm going to be painting and giving you an idea of what you can do with those plastic eggs that are meant to be painted by children. I'm going to give you some easy steps of how to create some simple flowers on them and transform them into some rustic treasures that you're going to want to keep. Today I'm a part of a YouTube collaboration called Hoppin' Down the Bunny Trail, and we have two hosts today. We have Dawn with Shabby Meets Bling and Monica with Up All Night DIY. Plus we have a playlist that you definitely want to give a click and watch all the videos that everyone has contributed for today's collaboration. Definitely take some time, check out their channels, and click that playlist. I'm sure you're going to find some fun ideas that you can create for your spring and Easter holiday. Well, let's get busy and let's turn these plastic eggs into something pretty. The eggs I'm going to be using are plastic. They have a hole in the top and a seam on the side. I'm going to be using acrylic paint to paint some flowers on these, but in the end I'm going to get them to really look great and not look so much like plastic. So to start this process, I chose some basic colors. I'm going to be creating a rose first. And when I create the rose, especially on a white surface, I like to go ahead and base coat the color burnt sienna first. It's nice to have that little bit of rustiness color underneath. In the end, my rose is going to have more of a red look to it, but I like to do that under painting just a little bit. Once I have my shapes in for my roses, which are basically one large shape of a rose off to the right, and then two little shapes, roses off to the side. It's basically a triangle shape. And then now I'm going to go ahead and just plop in a little bit of green. I'm looking to add leaves like here and there, not necessarily a halo all the way around. And this part, it's not really shapes of leaves, I'm just brushing in the green color. Up next, I'm going to create a little blue flower. This is kind of like more of like a forget-me-not, where it's just a simple little 5-petal flower, almost like a little star. I'm going to be using a round brush when I create that because a round brush has a point on it and it makes a little pointed end. I'm going to start at the outside of my petal and pull it to the center, and that's going to create that little star shape. Now you don't have to create full stars, you can also create partial ones. Down below I have partial ones, up at the top I have kind of more of a full one. I'm also going to add little green stems on there. When you're using a round brush, it works really well if you dip it in your paint, give it a twirl, and then pull it towards you. And that way you're going to create more of a sharper point on your brush. That helps make these little small lines. And of course, always pull towards yourself. That's an easier way to make more of a thin line. You can see here I'm making sure my stems are going off to the sides, not straight up and down. That's going to give these little flowers a lot more interest if you have the stems going different directions. The process I'm using of layering my colors for these flowers is I'm starting with my darkest colors first and then laying my lighter colors on the top. I often start that way when I'm using acrylic paint. It's just a way of layering the colors and getting more depth in your painting if you start dark from light. I don't usually wash my brush off in between my colors, especially if I'm using the same color. I mostly just keep on picking color up and then adding the color as I go. It just makes a nice blended looking flower. The next easy flower I'm going to be creating, I call it kind of a tap-tap flower. I have my brush loaded with 2 different colors of paint. This particular one I'm doing a dark purple and a white. And I'm going to be tapping from the top of my flower, and as I go down, I'm getting a little wider with my color. This flower really doesn't have a name. It just is kind of an interesting look for a flower, and whatever the viewer sees or brings to mind what it might be, that's the flower it's going to be. So I'm just tapping the shapes. If you start at the bottom of your flower, just go a little wider and then get smaller as you come to the top. This is the base one, so I'm starting with the darker color and I'm going to be adding more layers on top, and in the end I will add a small little shape to this to even bring it probably more of a delphinium look. Not that I've ever seen a delphinium, really, in real life, but I think that's what it's going to look like. I'm going to be brushing in the same green idea of greens. Again, at this stage, I'm not actually painting in small shapes of leaves. I'm just brushing in shades of green in the background to give it a feel of like there's greens in the background. The hardest part of this project was actually hanging on to the eggs. I dropped those eggs I don't know how many different times. Thank goodness they weren't real and they're plastic. Acrylic paint does dry slightly darker, so you can take a look at your flowers as they're drying, and if you need to add another layer, which I decided I needed to add a little bit more depth to my color of my blue ones, they were a little over mixed, so I could go back in and just repaint that. That's the one nice thing about acrylic paint. You don't have to get stuck with what you originally painted. You can always add another layer. The next color I was going to be using was called Deep Burgundy from the Decor Americana colors. It's a beautiful shade of rose, and I wanted to have an antique look to these flowers in the end, and that color worked perfect. I'm coming in and I'm basically painting little comma strokes as I'm going around my flowers. For the roses, you do need to put a darker part for where your center is going to be. That's the darkest part of where your rose will be, is in the center. You want to have different areas for your centers. I have one that's up a little higher, one that's a little lower, and depending on where the center is, depends on the direction your rose will look like it's facing. While my paint was still wet, I picked up a little bit of Tuscan red in the Deco Art color as well, and I added that to my rose. While my paint was still wet, I also took a little bit of white and mixed it into the red to create a nice pretty shade of pink. I want to add pink as my top layer, not necessarily white. If I added white at this layer, my roses would have a very sharp look, so this way it's just more of a softer, romantic look to my rose. If you like painting and creating art, I do weekly tutorials on my channel. Come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. For those who would like to have a little help with drawing, I do have a sketchbook membership, and that's where I have all the line tracers for my paintings that I do on my YouTube channel. I'll include a link to my sketchbook membership down in the description box. It's easy to join, very reasonably priced, and I so appreciate those who have become members and supported my channel that way. The rose egg is almost finished. I'm just adding a little bit more of the green in the background. I'm using some of the middle shade of green, the dark green, and I'm also picking up just a tiny bit of the red to put over some of the green leaves. I love that look of a blush of red on top of the green. Just be careful if you do it. You don't want to overblend your red because red and green are complementary colors, and they're going to make brown if you overblend those colors. But just a light touch of the red on top makes a really pretty leaf of having just that blush of red on there. I added a little bit of green between my two roses as well to connect that part so it wasn't just a wide open area. That's something you can do, a little trick if your flowers are too far apart, or I could have added a little bit more red and made my rose slightly bigger. Now onto this purple flower. It kind of looks like a hot mess right now. I got way too much green at the top. It just basically looks like little blobs, but we're going to fix that. We're going to go ahead and add just a little bit more purple, but this time I'm going to be adding small little round shapes. If you think of like painting a little grape shape into my patterns, that's what I'm going to be doing. But first I tap in another base coat, make my flowers the width I want them. And then once I get that underneath color done, I'm going to pick up just the dark purple and I'm going to be creating those circle patterns. And because my paint is wet and it's a little bit thick, I'm going to be creating more of just a darker circle, but it's going to have some variations in it. Not necessarily polka dots, but think of it as more of a round circle petal-like shape. I'm hoping that makes sense. Hopefully you'll be able to see a little bit of it as I'm painting it now. You can see I'm making that round shape, and it's kind of pushing the paint to the edges a little bit more. So the edge of my circle is going to be darker, the center is going to be slightly lighter. You could also pick up a little bit of that lighter blue color that I had used in my blue flowers, and I did that on this one as well, and added another shade of purple to it, so it wasn't just all the same purple. By adding the white, that was one way you can change the shade of the color, but I thought it would benefit by adding just a little hint of blue in there as well. I liked how this all came together, and I really did rescue that area where I got a little crazy with my green. It was too much green in the background. In the end, this purple egg looks really nice, and I love the way that the little circles just added more form to this blobby-like flower. But it's a pretty easy flower to make still. Start with your blobs and then add your circles on the top, and it's going to come together nicely. I decided to add a few more off to the edge. Usually I add about 3 odd numbers is what I like to paint, but this needed to feel a little bit wider, so I went ahead and added just a little bit more of the purple off to the edge. Once I had that on, I went ahead and added a little bit more green to the bottom, lightened some of the other areas with that brighter shade of green, and I called it done. Now on the next easy flower I'm going to be painting is a tulip shape. To do this shape, I'm going to start with a basic U shape, fill it in with my color, add a point in the middle, and then 2 points off to each side. Now this is a shape you probably created when you were in elementary school. It's the same shape, but you're going to be surprised how great it looks, even though it's a simple little flower. Once I have the base of my flower done, I go ahead and add the greenery on. I'm going to start with a little thicker top and then come down with my stem at an angle, and then I'm going to be creating those tulip leaves. And tulip leaves are thicker, they have a little bit of a twist to them, and that's what it's going to read like it's a tulip flower, by creating those tulip leaves. And that's created with just creating more of a twist with your brush and a little bit different pressure. To get it to be a thicker leaf, you want to add more pressure, and to be a thinner part of your leaf, you're going to have less pressure. And that's what's going to make it really look like a fun tulip, is to have those big old curly leaves on the side. I do add a little bit more shade of reds to my tulip. I started with that bright shade of color of the Tuscan red, added a little bit of the deep burgundy off to the edges just to give it a little bit more depth when I created that simple little tulip flower. And that's just about it for my tulip. The last easy flower I'm going to be painting is a pansy. Pansies have 5 petals. They're going to be rounded at the edge. They're going to be a little wider at the outside of the petal, and then you're going to pull them narrower as you go towards the center. Pansies come in a whole bunch of colors, but I'm just going simple with this one and making it just mostly purple and different shades of that color. Last year, I created a whole series of the birth month flowers, and pansies were for the month of February. I created all the flowers in watercolors. Some of them I taught you how to draw, and then some I just showed how to paint. I'll include that link down inside of the description box if you'd like to check it out. It's a great way to learn how to paint flowers. I wanted to share a tip and a reminder that these eggs do have that plastic ridge that goes all the way around your egg. So when you start your painting process and you want to start in the middle, make sure that ridge is a little farther off. When I started this purple flower, I thought I had my pansy right in the middle, but I didn't. I had it a little bit too close to the ridge. So therefore, I had to rotate my painting a little bit farther than what I had thought I wanted to. In the end, it worked fine because I just did my pansies all kind of in a row and stacked them up. And yep, that was my finger that ran through that pansy. I tell you, I had a hard time hanging on to these. You might want to have a baby wipe handy so you can go ahead. Yep, I dropped it again. Have a baby wipe handy so you can go ahead and wipe them off if you need to. I'm able to fix this. I just add a little bit more paint over the top and fix my oops. And it does, you won't tell in the end where I actually smeared my paint all over. You could have also covered it up with some greenery if you needed to. That's the one nice thing about acrylic paint. You can always add another layer. Now to finish off these flowers, what really helps it look like a pansy is to put a little yellow center in there. So I'm going to be adding that bright shade of yellow to the centers of my flowers. Oh, this is where I had the bright idea of that maybe I could put it in there and paint it. Yeah, that didn't work for me either. So basically, I did have to hang on to them. Anyway, for me, I don't know. Maybe you can figure out how to keep them in there and use that as a holder. But for me, it just kind of worked better if I held it in my hand. Here I'm just putting in that same green shapes in the background, and I'm going to let it dry. Here I'm tapping in the yellow centers, and then voila, that really does help center up those flowers, and you can tell they're a pansy. I was going to let these dry really well because I wanted to add the next step, an antiquing glaze over the top. For my antiquing glaze, I was just basically going to use some instant coffee. I always have a container of instant coffee that's been mixed and then dried and sitting on my table. And all I have to do is add a little bit of water to it and I can use it over anything I want to. But look at how good this is looking. Look at how much this really has changed the look of this plastic egg. No longer does it look like a Dollar General egg, but it looks like a great rustic style, romantic style egg. I think it turned out fabulous. The one thing I did notice when I was holding it, I couldn't figure out how to not get fingerprints. So I'm trying to move my fingers, put the glaze on. Well, that wasn't working either. I thought perhaps maybe I could give it a dry and then add a little bit more. Yeah, well, that didn't work either. Then after thinking about it, I realized that all you really have to do is take a wooden skewer. Because those eggs have the hole in them, go ahead and put your egg on that wooden skewer. Then go ahead and put your glaze on it. You don't have to touch it. And then you can stick that wooden skewer into like maybe some cardboard or styrofoam and let it dry. As a final step, I went ahead and gave my eggs a clear coat to make sure all the layers would be permanent. To finish off that area where there was a hole, I used a little bit of lace on the top and added some string. You could also add a button, and I used some embroidery floss to be able to hang it from my Easter tree. If you have a little nest, these would look great in a nest as well. Well, let's take a look at what they look like all finished and sitting in my studio. Leave me a comment or give me a thumbs up if these eggs are something you might create for your spring decor. If you're new to my channel and you like doing art and crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. If you're already a subscriber, make sure you click that bell so you get notifications of any new videos I might be posting. If you enjoyed this tutorial today on how to make these eggs, here's a couple more videos you might want to check out. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and next time you'll create right along with me.